Okay, class, today we are going to continue our discussion of Sophocles and wrap up our unit on Greek drama by discussing this play, Antigone. This is another one of the plays similar to Sophocles' Oedipus the King, where it's often assigned for high schoolers in the West. This play is more often assigned nowadays, especially because it has its main character as a young woman. And so, presumably, young women reading this play, and young men as well, would potentially identify with Antigone and her conflict. I have Delphi here again, just because Apollo and the things that he symbolizes, like truth, justice, enlightenment, those sorts of things, are also features in this play. So here are my goals for today. We'll introduce Antigone the play. It depicts the family drama that ensues after Oedipus's revelation from Oedipus the King. Sorry, that's a typo there. Then we'll articulate the central conflict of Antigone, which is balancing family versus political duty. You know, is the individual more beholden to his or her family and their duties and expectations in love, or as a political citizen? We'll analyze the brotherly feud in the play and compare the sisterly feud. Finally, in this semester, we have two sisters who actually interact with one another in this play. Of course, actually throughout all this, but we'll just put an underline on it, the role of gender in this play is very important, so we'll consider that. We'll analyze the meaning of the punishments that Creon puts forth in the play and the meaning that's kind of implied behind them as a way to introduce Antigone's death. And I'll ask you, do you consider it as furthering the curse of her father, or is it potentially a triumph? And then to kind of wrap up our unit on Greek drama, we'll revisit Aristotle's opinion on Oedipus the King as the best tragedy and ask why not Antigone as a really excellent tragedy. Okay, so let's get started. This play is the third in the trilogy about Thebes, about the Oedipus cycle, basically. I had you guys skip over the second play, which is called Oedipus at Colonus. I posted a summary of it, so please read that. But basically, Oedipus at Colonus, it depicts Oedipus after his self-blinding and his exile. It depicts him with his two daughters primarily out in the wilderness, preparing for death, and then the sort of conflict of what to do with the legacy of Oedipus. His sons are fighting a very bloody civil war in Thebes over control over that city. They're fighting over the legacy of the father. We might assume that Oedipus's legacy is one of a curse, like he is this horribly cursed man, it seems. He is doomed to kill his own father and marry his mother, and he is doomed to realize he's done so at the point at which he could not go back from this curse. But actually in this play, in Oedipus at Colonus, he's revealed to be a figure that's associated with blessing. He seems to be so cursed that he's blessed, in fact, and he's forgiven. He sort of forgives himself. He's reclaimed as a figure of blessing, forgiven by Zeus, and the site of his burial is the site of a blessing for the land. And so it's pretty interesting. But these lines that I'm about to post here offer a really good recap of Oedipus the King. So I want to read through them as we consider the setting of this play, Antigone, that we're about to talk about. Okay, so this is a scene between the two sisters. So this is after their father is dead. Ismene speaks these lines to her sister Antigone. So Ismene says, "Oh, my sister, think how our own father died hated, his reputation in ruins, driven on by the crimes he brought to light himself, to gouge out his eyes with his own hands. Then mother, his mother and wife, both in one, mutilating her life in the twisted noose. And last, our two brothers dead in a single day, both shedding their own blood, poor suffering boys, battling out their common destiny hand to hand." So I'll just highlight these lines here. This is a really good recitation of all the tragedies that Antigone and Ismene have suffered. Like, these women are literally all alone now. Their father's dead. He dies at the end of Oedipus at Colonus. Their two brothers are dead at the start of the play Antigone. They have been fighting each other in combat over the throne of Thebes. They kill each other in the same day, kind of a symbol of civil war. And their mother, like, think of that tragedy. Their mother has killed herself, and moreover, she's not just their mother, she's also their grandmother. Yikes. You know, this would be a lot to handle if you were either daughter. Meanwhile, these two young women are in Thebes without protectors, and that's what these lines speak to. Now look at the two of us, left so alone. Think what a death will die, the worst of all, if we violate the laws and override the fixed decree of the throne, its power. We must be sensible. Remember, we are women. We're not born to contend with men. Then, too, we're underlings, ruled by much stronger hands. So we must submit in this, and things still worse. I, for one, all beg the dead to forgive me. I'm forced, I have no choice, I must obey the ones who stand in power. Why rush to extremes? It's madness, madness. So what she's talking about here, I've skipped the beginning part, which I'll get to in the next slide, but Ismene is arguing to Antigone about their powerlessness as women and as political underlings as well. She is on the side of the law. She's going to submit to their inferior positions and instead beg the dead to forgive them. What she's referring to is the fact that Polynices, their brother, and their other brother Eteocles, in killing themselves in battle, have left a political conflict in Thebes. Creon, their uncle slash great uncle, he's now the king of Thebes, and in order to prevent a rebellion from occurring again, like they've just had a lot of years of war, so in order to prevent another rebellion, Creon has decreed that Polynices was unjust in his attempt to take the throne back, and so he's like a political rebel. Therefore, Creon says you cannot bury the bodies of the rebels. He leaves Polynices' body to rot on the battlefield, and instead he buries Eteocles' body in this honorable burial. So just remember all the times we've discussed how much all cultures, but especially Greek cultures in this context, really revere proper treatment of the dead. And here we have a situation where these two young women, all alone, they have the injustice of one brother being treated like garbage while their other brother is honored. And what is their role? Should they obey the law, obey Creon's law, or should they obey their family duty and bury their brother whom they loved? Okay. Oh, let me say one more thing here to kind of set the scene a little bit. In the two sisters' conflict over political versus family duty, they also have to contend with this like third very important issue that's weighing over them, and that's their father's legacy. Are they going to pick their family over their city when their family is so screwed up and so associated with incest? Yikes. You know, there's the sort of sinister thread in choosing family over political duty for this family, because their father has already been someone who has honored certain family bonds too much, that is, he's committed incest, and he's honored other family bonds too little, that is, he's killed his own father. And so, in some ways, this play is about the children dealing with the legacy of a really screwed up family, and in this family, the issues are so gendered. There tends to be conflict between fathers and sons. He literally killed his own father, and overemphasis on the romantic love between the women and the male figures and their female family members. So he married his own mother. He seems to be overly involved in his daughters to the detriment of his sons. So it's rather interesting. Another thing to keep in mind in the middle play that we haven't read is that the setting of the middle play is on this hallowed, holy ground associated with the Furies. And so Sophocles here he's linking up the thematic issue in all of this trilogy of plays, which is about like family conflict. The Furies are the gods of the home and the sort of like blood, the ways in which violence committed against a family member is punished by the Furies. So he's linking into that, and also Sophocles is linking his trilogy of plays, back to Aeschylus's trilogy of plays, the Oresteia, which also featured the Furies prominently. So we're talking about justice in these plays as well. Okay, that was a lot, but okay. So here's the setting of Antigone. So remember what I was saying before. The opening scene typically depicts a messenger who gives us news about the central conflict of the play. And here we have Antigone as the messenger. So in some ways, she's a lot like her father. Remember, he was the one giving us the messenger's message at the beginning of his play, Oedipus the King. Now it's Antigone. But she's in such a different position than her father was. He was the king of Thebes. She is like an outsider to Thebes, even though she is the daughter of the royal family of Thebes. But her family is all dead now. Okay, so time and place, time and scene. The royal house of Thebes, it is still night, and the invading armies of Argos have just been driven from the city. So the invading armies of Argos, these are the army that Polynices was able to rally to help him challenge his brother to the throne. So this is like sort of like the rebel army, according to Creon, or we might see it as like the righteous army of Polynices. Okay, fighting on opposite sides, the sons of Oedipus, Eteocles and Polynices, have killed each other in combat. So remember, Eteocles and Polynices, the sons, they had this agreement where they were going to share rule of Thebes, where Eteocles would rule for a year and then give the throne to Polynices. He would rule for a year, back and forth. That was the agreement. But when Eteocles is king, he decides he's not going to give up the throne, which he's the king. You can't force a king to give up their power. That's one of the problems with monarchy. So anyway, when he doesn't give it up, Polynices assembles this army to try to take the throne back, which he sees as his righteous kind of, role. But the two of them kill each other. Their uncle Creon is now king of Thebes. Enter Antigone, slipping through the central doors of the palace. She motions to her sister Ismene, who follows her cautiously towards an altar at the center of the stage. Note the similar setting as Oedipus the King, an altar, but so much has changed since that play and this one. One other thing to keep in mind is that this play, Antigone, was the first one that Sophocles wrote. He wrote it before Oedipus the King. And so some of these parallels are very, very intentional, of course. He wrote this one first. In fact, we might think of this play as being more central to his ideas about this family drama in Thebes than even Oedipus the King, even though Oedipus the King is often held up as the best play. Okay, so here's what Antigone says as she enters. At night. My own flesh and blood, dear sister, dear Ismene, how many griefs our father Oedipus handed down? Do you know one? I ask you one grief that Zeus will not perfect for us, for the two of us, while we still live and breathe. There's nothing, no pain. Our lives are pain. No private shame, no public disgrace, nothing I haven't seen in your griefs and mine. And now this, an emergency decree, they say the commander has just now declared for all of Thebes. What? Haven't you heard? Don't you see? The doom reserved for enemies marches on the one we love the most. The ones we love the most. The other things to bring up, our lives are pain, just really emphasizing how little these two young women have going for them right now. There's no private shame. Everything bad about their family is public knowledge. Yikes. And then this line here, the doom reserved for our enemies marches on the ones we love the most. What she's referring to here by doom reserved for our enemies is the fact that in a battle, the alternate side, the side that loses, is kind of doomed to having a they're doomed to humiliation, which extends to the humiliation of their bodies after death. So think back to the Trojan conflict in the Iliad and how after Achilles kills Hector, he desecrates Hector's body and humiliates it. That's kind of justified in a sense by war. It's Achilles' glory over Hector's, and yet Priam goes to Achilles to beg for Hector's body. We talk a lot about this, but so the doom reserved for our enemies, which is leaving the fallen enemy soldiers to rot on the battlefield, that's now being forced on the ones that they love the most, their brother. So these two young women have to tolerate the fact that their brother's corpse is rotting on the battlefield. It's illegal, according to Creon, the new king, to bury bodies of the rebels. So this is Antigone's problem. She really wants to bury her brother. She hates that dogs and wild birds and stuff are just eating his corpse. It's horrible. One thing to think about in terms of this brotherly feud, this civil war between the brothers over Thebes, is that we've seen similar connections before. There's a Cain and Abel story that we didn't spend too much time with in this class, but from the Hebrew Bible, Adam and Eve's two sons, one kills the other. Cain kills Abel. So a lot of ancient cultures really are drawn to these stories. Remember in the Ramayana, we had the monkey brothers, Sugriva and Bali, who also were fighting over the throne of their kingdom. Atreus and Thyestes, this is the father of Agamemnon and Menelaus, and their uncle, who have this horrible feud in the Oresteia, in the background of the Oresteia. These brothers just truly hate each other, it seems. And similar here, Polynices and Eteocles, they really, really seem to hate each other when they're suffering under the same issues, And what's interesting, this is a funeral kind of pyre sort of thing. So it's an urn of the tomb of some lady, I guess, depicting the deaths of Eteocles and Polynices. So the civil war is so brutal that the two young men who are leaders of the conflict, they die at each other's hands. It's kind of like the argument is that when you have a civil war like this, everybody loses. Civil wars are especially damaging, obviously, because it's, when you have a war against an outsider, that reaffirms the connections of the in-group. But when the war is a civil war, it's members of the in-group fighting other members of the in-group. They don't realize their common connections, and instead they make enemies out of each other. And so the whole community ends up losing in a civil war. Anyway, and so that's probably the reason why they're so popular in these ancient myths, because they're some of the most damaging conflicts that we have. Okay. So I bring this up just because we're going to have a conflict between sisters soon. But to say a little bit more about the war, we have the chorus in this play. They begin by only desiring peace. They'll have a kind of radical character arc, just like Oedipus did in his play, and the chorus did in his play as well. But they begin in this way. They really, really want peace. They describe how horrible it was under the war between the two brothers. So 7 captains marshaled at 7 gates, 7 against their equals, gave their brazen trophies up to Zeus, god of the breaking rout of battle, all but 2, those blood brothers, one father, one mother, matched in rage, spears matched for the twin conquest, clashed and won the common prize of death. So totally equal on all sides, and they had this twin conquest, so like they're total equality matched in this kind of connection to twinning, but then they both cancel each other out almost here with the common prize of death. But now for victory, glorious in the morning, joy in her eyes to meet our joy. She is winging down to Thebes, our fleets of chariots wheeling in her wake. Now let us win oblivion from the wars, thronging the temples of the gods and singing dancing choirs through the night. Lord Dionysus, god of the dance that shakes the land of Thebes, now lead the way. So the tone is totally changed in this little stanza here. They are ready to party. So after the war is over, they're so excited. Like these two guys have canceled each other out. The war is over. Creon's now in charge. They can now move on from all of the drama of Oedipus. They assume that it's time to move on now. Like we can party. So they're asking for oblivion. That means forgetting the wars. Let's sing and dance and honor Lord Dionysus. Remember, he's the god of wine and drama and partying. They're excited. The chorus is very pumped. Someone is not pumped, however, after the war is over, and that's Antigone. Ismene is also sort of not excited, but Antigone especially is very upset. So in this image, I think most people agree that this is Antigone here. She's more stern. She's in black because Antigone in the play is often associated with death and funerals. She's got like an urn here. Ismene is much more temperate, and she tries to persuade her sister. So this woman here is leaning in, trying to persuade a woman who has her back turned to her. So I think this is Ismene. She's young, innocent, wearing white. Also a little bit more of like a romance figure with her like long pretty hair and her shoulder showing. Where Antigone is kind of like stern and all business. Okay, so here's the conflict between the two sisters. They should be celebrating if they only honored their political bonds and expectations. The war is over. The city is thriving now. But Antigone's thinking about their family. So Antigone, raising her hands, will you lift up this body with these bare hands and lower it with me? She's asking Ismene to bury her brother. Ismene, what? You'd bury him when a law forbids the city? Antigone, yes, he is my brother, and deny it as you will, your brother too. No one will ever convict me for a traitor. Note, this word is so important. We talked about treason before, I think in the Odyssey, with the slave girls committing treason against the house of Odysseus. But here, Antigone invokes the language of treason to describe her desire to bury her brother and break the law. So even though breaking the law of the city, the political order, would be potentially considered treason, Antigone's claiming here that it's actually treason to go against their family. She's saying that actually Ismene is a traitor to their family, where this language is usually, what's the word, resigned? Usually refers to a political crime. Okay, so that's their conflict. So who or what does Antigone serve, her state or her family? This is really the central conflict here. Antigone is wholly on the side of family. Antigone says, if you say so, you will make me hate you. And she's speaking to Antigone here. I forget what Antigone says, but so Antigone says, if Ismene commits to following the law of the city, you will make me hate you, Antigone says, and the hatred of the dead by all rights will haunt you night and day. But leave me to my own absurdity, leave me to suffer this dreadful thing. I will suffer nothing as great as death without glory. So she's totally committed to doing what she wants to do, which is to bury her brother. She's committed to suffering any dreadful thing. And it is dreadful to break the law. Creon has said that anyone who breaks the law and buries the dead rebels will be punished by death. But notice that Antigone uses language that's pretty striking here. She'll suffer nothing as great as death without glory. Antigone refers to glory in this way. She's aligning herself with the Greek heroes that we read about in the Iliad, in the Odyssey. She sees burying her brother as acting for glory. So in some ways, she's preserving his glory as a military soldier, by giving him a proper burial. But in some ways, she's claiming glory for herself. She's claiming herself as a hero, a glorious hero, in choosing to bury her brother. Pretty interesting defying of gender roles. Also note here that she speaks that Ismene will what's the word? I'm struggling with my words today. She's saying that Ismene, if she proceeds with not burying the brother, she'll earn the hatred of the dead. Antigone throughout this play often aligns herself with the dead. Like she says things like, my concerns are with the dead, yours with the living. She is acting as if she's already dead, or maybe she just sees herself as more aligned with the dead. In some ways, this might just be she's more aligned with her family who has passed on already. It might be some of that, but it is kind of interesting. We'll talk later about the language in the play that calls her the bride of death and these sorts of things. She's very, very much associated with the dead. Okay, Creon's motivations. So Creon's an interesting figure in this play. We've met him before in Oedipus the King. He's the one who went to Delphi to get the oracle about why Thebes had a plague. He starts off this play very reasonable. Here are his motivations. So he has this law that on its face seems rather unreasonable, but he has reasons for thinking this. And he makes this law against burying the rebels. Because he's choosing his country over other values. Okay, whoever places a friend above the good of his own country, he is nothing. I have no use for him. Zeus my witness, Zeus who sees all things always. I can never stand by silent, watching destruction march against our city, putting safety to rout, nor could I ever make that man a friend of mine who menaces our country. Remember this, our country is our safety. Only while she voyages true on course can we establish friendships truer than blood itself. Such are my standards. They make our city great. So he's basically saying that the war that Polynices brought on the city was a menace. So he says he would never make a friend of mine who menaces our country. Polynices brought war onto Thebes. Therefore, he's placing other values above the good of his own country. So Creon is not going to do that. He's going to place his country over other concerns. Our country is our safety. So he's choosing peace, he's choosing safety, he's choosing his country. And then he goes so far to say here that it's possible to establish friendships truer than blood itself. So family is important, but we can establish friendships that are even truer than family relationships. So he's kind of making an argument for political relationships. Citizens together, the citizens of a country can be stronger than the sort of blood feuds that, in some ways I think that he's referring back to the sort of concerns of the Aeschylus plays here. When you honor too much blood, avenging blood, you forget that you bring destruction, and it might be better to honor political bonds instead, which is sort of the reason why Athens exists. It's this democracy. Okay, nice. Okay, so then this is the conflict for Creon is, he thinks that he's protecting his city in issuing this law. And so it becomes a problem when someone is burying Polynices. So there's like a sentry, he's like a messenger guy. So he comes to tell Creon that someone has buried Polynices. Someone has sprinkled dirt on Polynices. So it's not like a true burial, but it's like a ritualistic kind of one, like the symbol of a burial. So when the sentry tells him this stuff, Creon gets very, very angry. He says, I swear to Zeus, as I still believe in Zeus, if you don't find the man who buried that corpse, the very man, and produce him before my eyes, simple death won't be enough for you. Not till we string you up alive and wring the immorality out of you. Then you can steal the rest of your days better informed about where to make a killing. You'll have learned at last it doesn't pay to itch for rewards from every hand that beckons. Filthy prophets wreck most men, you'll see. They'll never save your life. Okay, so he's really yelling at this sentry guy. But the thing I wanted to emphasize in this speech is that Creon assumes that it's a man who buried the corpse. He's like, if you don't find that man who buried the corpse, the very man, simple death won't be enough for you. So I'm going to kill you if you don't find that man. Why do you think Creon is so adamant that it was a man who did this? I think his assumption that a man buried the corpse speaks a little bit to his wrath here when he wheels on the sentry. He's so angry here. I think he's so angry because he assumes that the burial of the corpse is an attempt to affront his rule as the new king. This is like his first law he's issued as the new king, and someone has immediately broken it. So he sees it as a challenge to his rule. And so this kind of, to my mind, explains why he gets so irate and angry, because he sees it as a challenge to him as the new king. But of course, it's not a man who buried the corpse, it's Antigone. She didn't bury the corpse to defy him, but she buried the corpse to honor her brother. She also, in a way, sees it as a way for glory. So that's kind of interesting, to think about. Is she really challenging Creon here? Maybe she is. Here is the first choral Stasimon, the first choral song. It's a very famous celebration of humanity, so I want to bring it to your attention. Sometimes this is excerpted as kind of like, I don't know, sometimes it's excerpted in like poetry books and stuff like that. People really like it because it's like a celebration of humanity over the gods. Here's just some lines. So numberless wonders, terrible wonders, walk the world, but none the match for man. Man, the master, ingenious past all measure, past all dreams, the skills within his grasps, he forges on now to destruction, now again to greatness. When he weaves in the laws of the land and the justice of the gods, that binds his oaths together, he and his city rise, but the city casts out the man who weds himself to inhumanity, thanks to reckless daring. Never share my hearth, never think my thoughts, whoever does such things. So the chorus is celebrating humans who act righteously by binding their oaths together with the laws of the land and the justice of the gods. This is what they honor, and when man does that, there is nothing that can match man. They're the master and genius past all measures. Anyway, so like they're basically saying that humans are the best when they are righteous and honor the gods and obey the laws. So this is interesting that the chorus starts off by thinking that like obeying the laws of the land are the most important thing together with the justice of the gods. We'll see at the end of the play that the chorus very much aligns with Antigone, the lawbreaker. One other thing to mention here is they say the city casts out the man who weds himself to inhumanity. Talking about casting out people from the city is interesting in this play because remember that Oedipus has been cast out from the city. Perhaps we could think of Polynices being cast out of the city, potentially. There's the threat of Antigone being cast out from the city. This is very much a play about like who's in the city and who's out. It's rather interesting that Oedipus, starts off as an outcast, but actually he becomes blessed, and the same kind of seems to take place here. That Antigone seems like an outsider, but actually becomes sort of the symbol of the city and humanity. And then reckless daring. I think this is an interesting thing to emphasize too. What exactly is reckless daring in this play? It's rather interesting that it's reckless for Antigone to bury her own brother, something that seems rather natural to do. But in this context, in this play, it's breaking the law to bury your brother. Anyway, keep going. Finally, Creon realizes, he learns that it's Antigone is the one who broke his law. So he confronts her. You had the gall to break this law. Antigone answers, of course I did. It wasn't Zeus, not in the least, who made this proclamation. Not to me. I'll just stop here. She's basically saying, I answer to Zeus, not you. So she's saying, like, Zeus is the highest law in the land, not the law of the king. So it wasn't Zeus, not in the least, who made this proclamation, not to me. Nor did that justice dwelling with the gods beneath the earth ordain such laws for men. Nor did I think your edict had such force that you, a mere mortal, could override the gods, the great unwritten, unshakable traditions. They are alive, not just today or yesterday. They live forever, from the first of time, and no one knows when they first saw the light. So Antigone here is making a claim for religion over political power, and she's also making a claim for something we'd call natural law over other types of laws. Not only does Creon's law override the gods, but it overrides great unwritten, unshakable traditions, the traditions of a proper burial. These traditions are alive, not just today or yesterday, they live forever. When people refer to things like natural laws, those are the sort of traditions that are so universally understood that you don't even need to really write them down. Like, like burying the dead is one of these things. Like allowing people to get married is one of these things usually. There's other natural laws, you could look them up, but they tend to be things that are so like universally done or just, traditions that go back generations that it doesn't make sense to outlaw them. So anyway, notice how powerful she is with her language. She's speaking to a much older man, so it's her uncle / great uncle. She's a very young woman, probably a teenager, maybe she's in her 20s, but yeah, she's like fierce in her opposition to him. And that continues throughout the play. Antigone is often seen as a figure who speaks truth to power. She's a symbol of protest. So when a political system overextends the legitimacy of their power, sometimes protest is kind of the only option. And that's what happens in this play. She sees Creon is overreaching with his law, and so she protests it. This is kind of a really great scene that's only possible now that Greek drama has multiple characters. So that in this scene, Antigone's on the stage, so is Creon, and then so is the chorus. So I'll try to explain what's going on as I read it. Antigone says, "Enough, give me glory. What greater glory could I win than to give my own brother decent burial? These citizens here would all agree." So she kind of points or gestures to the chorus. She says, "These citizens would all agree, these chorus citizens, they would praise me too if their lips weren't locked in fear." So she's claiming that the chorus is on her side, but they're afraid to speak up to Creon. And then she points to Creon and says, "Lucky tyrants, the perquisites of power, ruthless power to do and say whatever pleases them." Perquisites is a fancy word, but if you've heard the word perk, a perk is like a benefit. So the benefits of power is that tyrants can do whatever they want and say whatever they want. And no one will speak up because they're afraid of the tyrant. Okay, Creon says, "You alone of all people in Thebes see things that way." So Creon thinks she's completely wrong. He's like, "No, I'm not a tyrant. You're the only one who thinks that I'm a bad guy." But then Antigone says, "They see it that way. The chorus sees it that way, but defer to you and keep their tongues in leash." So these two symbols here, their lips are locked in fear, their tongues in leash. So a leash, like you put a leash on a dog to keep it from running away, to keep it from being free. And then lips locked in fear, lips that are imprisoned with a lock. These are symbols of, they're symbols for when speech is not free. So some, the USA, I think our First Amendment is the freedom of speech, the freedom of protest. So it protects the kinds of speech that has power, political power, against the political system. Some places don't have free speech laws like this. This scene here is very much in favor of speech as a way to critique power. Anyway, Creon obviously does not like what she's saying. Okay, so I'll step back and we'll talk a little bit more about what Antigone was talking about on that last slide in a future slide, but this is an interesting question. Does Antigone choose death? In some ways, it is pretty certain that she's choosing to die. Like, she sees suicide as glorious, it seems. Some people, I think the leader of the chorus, say stuff like, "Only a fool could be in love with death," and yet Antigone is in love with death. She says, "Live your life." I think she's speaking to her sister maybe here. "I gave myself to death long ago so I might serve the dead." She sees herself as already among the dead in this way. She's later called the Bride of Death. So in some ways we can see her as very much in charge of her own destiny. She's an agent of her own, autonomy and power. She chooses death. It's glorious. But we can also see her as cursed and fulfilling the curse that her father started. And actually his parents started, because they knew that having a child meant that they would, be cursed. So anyway, there might be a generational curse that's going on. The chorus sort of suggests that she might be cursed in the second stasamon. They do it kind of indirectly here through this metaphor of a cresting wave. So as I read this, try to picture the wave that they're describing and how the wave is a symbol for generational trauma and generational, issues and curses and stuff. Okay, blessed. They are truly blessed who all their lives have never tasted devastation. For others, once the gods have rocked a house to its foundations, the ruin will never cease, cresting on and on from one generation on throughout the race, like a great mounting tide driven on by savage northern gales, surging over the dead black depths, roiling up from the bottom dark heaves of sand, and the headlands taking the storm's onslaught, full force, roar, and the low moaning echoes on and on. So this kind of horrible scene of a tide during a storm that's attacking the shore. The headlands are the lands right by the shore, right by the ocean. So the storm keeps thrashing the shore full force, and like the storm seems to never end. And so the suggestion here is that like Oedipus's crime, which goes out back before him too, it keeps cresting over and over and over again on the next generation and the next and the next. Yeah. So anyway, we could see Antigone as kind of both, you know. She sees herself in control of her own fate, but on the other hand, like her fate is to die. So isn't she fulfilling patterns that extend beyond her birth? Okay, Creon's priorities change throughout the play. He has a long, kind of interesting character arc. He starts off very reasonable. He values safety and the sort of political stability that he's trying to uphold in his new city that he's the king of. But then when he learns that it's Antigone who's challenging him, he gets a little strange. And his target for his wrath and rage seems to shift a little bit. We must defend the men who live by law. Never let some woman triumph over us. Better to fall from power, if fall we must, at the hands of a man. Never be rated inferior to a woman. Never. So, you know, at first he seemed rather reasonable. We assumed he was, you know, just against anyone who was trying to stir up drama in his city. He seemed to be a proponent of peace and order and stability. But in this speech, he seems to really, really take a lot of issue with the fact that it's a woman who's triumphing over him. And he says it's better to fall from power at the hands of a man than to be rated inferior to a woman in any capacity. So he really sees this as like terribly insulting that it's his great niece, a woman, who's challenging him. He's emasculated in a way, or he sees himself as that. His son, Haman, is an interesting character in this play. He is an important challenge against Creon's, his emasculation, threat. Haman speaks for the people of Thebes. He speaks on behalf of Antigone as well. He is engaged to be married to Antigone. He tries to reason with his father at some point. So this is kind of a continuation of the scene where the chorus where Antigone describes the chorus as having their tongues in leash and their lips locked. He says to Creon, he's being very respectful here, and he's much more respectful than Antigone when he speaks to his father. But he says, of course it's not for you, Creon, in the normal run of things to watch whatever men say or do, or find to criticize. The man in the street, you know, dreads your glance. He'd never say anything displeasing to your face. But it's for me to catch the murmurs in the dark, the way the city mourns for this young girl. No woman, they say, ever deserved death less, and such a brutal death for such a glorious action. So he's saying, you might not know this because you're the king, and people won't say displeasing things to your face, but I've been listening to the murmurs in the dark, and the city is mourning for this girl. She doesn't deserve to die, because she did something glorious in burying her brother. So he's trying to warn his dad, but his dad really doesn't listen to him. He sees it as an affront. Haman really tries, though. Haman says, no, it's no disgrace for a man, even a wise man, to learn many things and not to be too rigid. You've seen trees by a raging winter torrent. How many sway with the flood and salvage every twig? But not the stubborn. They're ripped out, roots and all. Bend or break. The same when a man is sailing. Haul your sheets too taut, never give an inch, and you'll capsize. And you'll go the rest of the voyage keel up and the rowing benches under. So he's encouraging his father to bend, because if he doesn't bend in this situation, he's going to break. It's just like a tree will break when it's not flexible, or like a ship will capsize when its sails are too taut. So this is really good advice, People in power need to have caveats or exceptions to laws. If you don't, you just seem like you're an unreasonable, tyrant. And that's exactly what ends up happening with Creon. But I want to talk about that resolution through the changing punishments in the play. So there's this law that you can't bury the rebels. The punishment at the beginning for breaking that law, Antigone articulates it: whoever disobeys the law in the least will die, his doom is sealed, stoning to death inside the city walls. So stoning to death inside the city. What does this symbolize? If this is the punishment, why have it this way? Like, why not hang them or just poison them, slit their throat, whatever? These kind of public punishments are always really meaningful, and it pays dividends to think about what these punishments symbolize. So it's interesting that it would happen inside the city walls. That means that all of the city could potentially watch the death by stoning. Interesting. It's like the city is stoning the person inside the city that they don't want there anymore. So it's a very much like us versus them sort of thing. Like, there's a threat from within the city walls. Let's kill that threat by stoning them. And then thinking about stoning as a punishment is, it kind of really emphasizes this issue I'm talking about. When you stone someone to death, it's a very cruel punishment. In most places in the world, it's completely outlawed. I mean, it's horrible. It still happens these days, but it's usually never a legitimate way to kill someone. Anyway, it's very inhumane. But the way it works is it's all a whole bunch of little stones. It's not like one giant stone drops on the human so that they're killed. Like, that would be one thing. That would be like, I don't know what that would be. That would be kind of like a Looney Tunes kind of death. But if you're stoned to death, it means that the whole city is participating in your death. It's basically saying that everyone who's participating, everyone with stone to cast at the human that's about to die, they consent to your death. It's like the city purging a member that's no longer a member of the city anymore. It's pretty horrible. So it's like, if you're being stoned to death, like, everyone is against you, basically. And it's like a death by every little blow. It's a horrible way to die because it lasts a long time. Everyone is in it to kill you. So this is what Creon assumes people will go along with. He's like, if anyone breaks the law, they'll be stoned to death. We'll all do it. Right, guys? We'll all stone the criminal to death. That's not exactly what happens, however. At the end of the play, when Creon realizes, he doesn't say it explicitly, but I think he realizes that he cannot stone her to death in this way because the city will not consent to it. They're not going to kill Antigone. They're on Antigone's side. So he changes his mind about the punishment. He decides he says, I will take her down some wild, desolate path never trod by men, and wall her up alive in a rocky vault, and set out short rations, just the measure piety demands to keep the entire city free of defilement. There let her pray to the one God she worships, death. Who knows? May just deprive her from death. May just reprieve her from death, Or she may learn at last, better late than never, what a waste of breath it is to worship death. So, he's kind of making fun of Antigone here for being so aligned with death, but he decides to change the punishment. He's going to take her out into the wilderness where no one has ever been before. She's going to be totally isolated. And then he's going to build her up a rocky vault. It's like a living tomb. He's going to enclose her in this, rock wall and then give her some food. And then she'll live there until she starves to death, presumably. But just notice how different this kind of punishment is. He wants to go someplace where no one knows where they are. I think he sort of is assuming that people will not be on his side any longer. And actually, this is exactly what Antigone wants. She wants to die, so this kind of living death in a living burial site would be pretty cool for her. It's also similar to how Oedipus dies. No one knows where his exact burial place is. So it's kind of interesting that Antigone gets a similar fate as her father in Creon's new plan. Okay, so I'm just emphasizing this because I think it emphasizes how much the chorus has changed, and by the chorus being a symbolic of the whole city. they're on Antigone's side against Creon towards the end, when they started off on Creon's side against, criminals, I guess. Okay, so then in the end, Antigone has all these links between death and marriage. When she chooses death, it's as if she's choosing to get married to death. It's very interesting, especially since she's engaged in the play to Haman. So she refers to the tomb she's sentenced to die in as her bridal bed, my house, my prison, cut in the hollow rock, my everlasting watch. My bridal bed. So your bridal bed is the bed on which you'll lose your virginity when you're married. So she sort of sees her death as sort of a ritual of marriage, which is kind of interesting. She builds on this later. Never, I tell you, if I had been the mother of children, or if my husband died, exposed and rotting, I'd never have taken this ordeal upon myself, never defied our people's will. What law, you ask, do I satisfy with what I say? A husband dead, there might have been another, a child by another too, if I had lost the first. But mother and father, both lost in the halls of death, no brother could ever spring to light again. This is very weird, but basically what she's saying here is she's excited to die a virgin. She's going into her bridal bed by dying. She's going to be totally aligned in her death with her given family. So because she hasn't gotten married, she's never been the mother to children, she's never had a husband. So because she's never had sex or had children, she feels more righteous in going to die with her family. It's rather interesting, actually. So what's going on here is the claim here is that a young woman who has not yet made a link to another family, she's a better daughter if she dies along with her original family. So yeah. And so in that way, her death is a sort of marriage into her family who's already all dead and who is already rather incestuous. So it's kind of like her death is she's marrying her dead family, like her dad and her mom and her brothers and stuff. It's kind of interesting. Yeah, if I had been the mother of children, or if my husband died, I'd never have taken this ordeal. She wouldn't have taken the ordeal upon herself. She would never have broken the law if she had been married, because she could continue to have children and extend the family that she married into. But because she hasn't been married yet, her father and mother have been lost in the hall of death, and there's no brother that could spring to light again. Her parents have killed, because her parents are dead, there's no more chance at their line continuing, and so she chooses to die with their line, as opposed to creating a new line with a marriage partner. Really weird, but I just wanted to include this in here because I think it extends the sort of incest themes to this kind of idea about death. She's later called the Bride of Death, 1328. So this is the line from before: O tomb, my bridal bed, my house, my prison, cut in the hollow rock, my everlasting watch. I'll soon be there, soon embrace my own, the great growing family of our dead. Persephone has received among her ghosts. So she sees herself as embracing her own in the family of dead, of our dead. I think this kind of links up to the sort of she's choosing to marry into her family, who are already all dead. So it's kind of incesty. Haman, her fiance, he also kills himself, so he wants to choose death as well. So there Haman lies, body enfolding body. He has won his bride at last, poor boy, not here but in the houses of the dead. I find this interesting. I'm curious what you guys think of it. But there is a way in which death is the great equalizer. I mean, there's a way in which we can see this as very incestuous, sort of her choosing her dead family and embracing her own family. But also, there is a way in which death levels all distinctions between people, and perhaps that's what she's choosing in a way, I suppose. Persephone is, we'll read a little bit more about her when we read Ovid, but she's the goddess, she's the wife of the god of death, Hades, queen of the underworld. And so Antigone is aligning herself in some ways with that figure. Okay, why does Creon change his mind about Polynices? So sort of at this point, maybe a little bit before, Creon realizes he's kind of really screwed up about the burial of Polynices, and he handled this really badly because he's basically got a rebellion on his hands because he didn't listen to his son, he didn't listen to Antigone, and he was overly cruel in his furthering of the law he wrote. So why he changes his mind is Tiresias finally tells him. So remember, Tiresias is this figure of prophecy. He's the one who told Oedipus what he didn't want to hear. He's back again to tell us what we don't want to hear. We tell Creon what Creon doesn't want to hear. This is before Haman dies. Tiresias warns Creon to change, or else bad things will happen. He says, "Then know this too, learn this by heart. The chariot of the sun will not race through so many circuits more before you have surrendered one born of your own loins, your own flesh and blood, a corpse for corpses given in return, since you have thrust to the world below a child sprung for the world above, ruthlessly lodged a living soul within the grave. Then you've robbed the gods below the earth, keeping a dead body here in the bright air, unburied, unsung, unhallowed by the rites." So he says, because you buried Antigone alive, ruthlessly lodging a living soul within the grave, you've robbed the gods below the earth of their rights, and so you'll be punished by having one born of your own loins, a corpse. So basically he says, if you're doing this with Antigone, Haman will die. And that's exactly what happens. So a death for a death, in a way. Here are some contemporary images of the death of Haman. So Haman dying when he sees Antigone, who has died. He dies too, he kills himself. Here's the burial of Haman. And this is seen as the sort of thing that forces Creon to realize what he's done. And so in this way, we can talk about the sort of recognition and reversal things from Aristotle. So remember, recognition, or anagnoresis, the startling discovery that produces a change from ignorance to knowledge. Aristotle suggests it's most effective when paired with reversal of fortune. He sees this as, reaching its apex in Oedipus the King when those two things come at once. But we can also see potentially that this happens for Creon. So does it exist in Antigone? I think so, in some ways, but in some ways not. And so we'll talk about that in this slide. So remember, for Oedipus the King, it is encapsulated when this moment, we're warned about it, and then it finally becomes true. Like Oedipus, becomes blind, becomes a beggar, becomes exiled, kind of at the same moment that he realizes the truth. And so when we think about it in Antigone, who has a change from ignorance to knowledge? Who has a reversal of fortune? In some way, it's Creon. So at the end, when he sees his son dead, he also sees his wife dead. So when Haman kills himself, his mother is so sad that she kills herself too. This is a horrible thing for anyone to experience, but it's especially for like a political leader. This would be really bad because his heir and his wife are dead. So the possibility of producing more heirs are like, they no longer exist any longer, So take me away, I beg you, out of sight, a rash, indiscriminate fool. I murdered you, my son, against my will. You too, my wife, wailing wreck of a man, whom to look to, where to lean for support. He's desperately turning from Haman to Eurydice on their biers. So he's between their funeral biers where their bodies are laid out, and he's like looking from both of them, and he's totally wrecked. Whatever I touch goes wrong. Once more, crushing fates come down upon my head. So he does seem rather tragic. I mean, I do feel for him here. Like, the death of his wife and his son happened because he was so proud, and he wouldn't bend on this issue. And now he's punished horribly. But this also kind of doesn't fit. Antigone, the play, it's called Antigone. I think we'd want Antigone to be the hero of it, not Creon. So is Antigone a hero, according to Aristotle? Does she have a moment of recognition? Does she have a moment of reversal? To my mind, I don't think she really recognizes anything. She seems at the beginning of the play to know exactly what she should do. and then she does it. She doesn't really reverse her fortune. She might reverse her fortune a little bit. She starts off completely low, like without power, totally alone, and then she ends up, together with her family among the dead. She sees it as a glorious death, so potentially she has a reversal, but it's a reversal towards like glory in her mind. So she doesn't really seem to fit Aristotle's definition, and yet I still want to call her a hero. Because she has lines like this, okay, leave me to my own absurdity, leave me to suffer this dreadful thing. I will suffer nothing as great as death without glory. I mean, she claims herself as acting gloriously, like a Trojan warrior, or like a Greek warrior. She calls her bridal bed, her tomb, her bridal bed, my house, my prison. She calls it her everlasting watch. This is similar language to the language in the Oresteia plays that was used to describe the watchman at the beginning when he was so sleepy he couldn't sleep, he couldn't stay awake, and then at the end the court of law is described as like the everlasting watch over the city of Athens. Antigone sees herself by dying as achieving this kind of like everlasting sight. Like she'll be able to protect her family when she's dead, I guess. It's kind of interesting. So, I mean, I find this pretty cool. Like, these are great lines of a hero, maybe. So, one thing I'd say about this is it's possible that, she doesn't fit Aristotle's definition of a hero, but I think in a way, Antigone's heroism is linked to her gender. She is a hero like a Greek male hero would be in an epic, like an Achilles figure who dies in glory, or Hector, like he dies in glory. Someone who achieves exactly what they wanted, like Odysseus. But she's in a tragedy because she's a woman, if that makes sense. So I sort of have this argument that like she's a hero, she's an epic hero whose tragedy is that she was born a woman. And so I wonder what you guys think of that, if you agree. I love this play for a lot of reasons, but one is that it does a good job of emphasizing that females can also be heroes too. And that's what we'll be reading about in part in our next text. So homework for next time, read Virgil, the Aeneid, excerpts from books 1 and 2. It's about 50 pages. Book 1, the summary of it is that Aeneas, a Trojan prince, he escapes the destruction of Troy after the war. He lands on the shores of Carthage in North Africa, meets Dido, queen of Carthage, so this very successful and beautiful queen who is a widow. She doesn't have a king. She's very powerful in her own right. And then in book 2, Aeneas tells Dido the story of the fall of Troy. So some of your questions will be answered by reading this. This is the great epic of the Roman Empire. So I'll post a brief summary of the Aeneid plus guiding questions on Brightspace. But, yeah, please read that for next time, and have a good holiday break.